What started out as a complete wreck is finally looking like a motorcycle once again, but it's still got a ways to go. This is my 2024 Ducati Diavel V4, a bike that was not supposed to be back on the road again. It was looked at as little more than spare parts, written off and in pieces when I got it. Since then, we have tackled front suspension, rewired electrical failures, sorted fuel lines, brought bodywork back, and even saved the headlight. In the last episode, we hit a major milestone. For the first time in over 5 months, we got this bike back on the road. Not just running, but actually riding. Until
I think we have issues.
Happened.
I don't know yet. We'll figure it out.
So we have some issues. In that first ride that we just did, I noticed something amiss with this front end. And I still don't really know exactly what it is, but what I think it is, the only piece of this whole front end that we didn't replace were the bearings. And there's 2 of them. If you remember looking back, there's a bearing up here at the top that we actually put back in when we put the front suspension in. And there's a bearing that sits on the bottom here as well. And we didn't replace either of those. And in the type of crash that we had, I believe that one of the ball bearings within that circle of bearings is not perfect anymore. And so when you move the handlebars this way and that way, there's a little bit of a jitter. And it's not in the same spot every single time you move the handlebars. And so that leads me to believe that it has to be one of those ball bearings that's spinning as it's turning, and in different spots, that little bit of a divot will show in a little bit of a jitter in the handlebars. All that to say, this whole front end needs to come back apart. Because to get to those bearings, everything has to come off of here. For anybody in the future who's going to be doing this type of repair and messing around with this front end, I would suggest going ahead and replacing those ball bearings. They are pretty cheap. This is one of the only pieces on this whole Ducati that runs back through most of their lineup. And so I was able to source these parts really quickly through eBay and get them brand new, get them into the shop here, so we can actually go ahead and replace them really quickly. And by really quickly, I mean as long as it takes for me to take this whole thing apart and put it back together. You have seen this come apart already multiple times. So I won't subject you to a full run through of this teardown once again, but maybe a time lapse? If you've seen it once, you've seen it 1,000 times. And so now is as good a time as any to hit that subscribe button, drop me a like, and ring the bell so you don't miss out on anything in the future. All I want is the bearings in the bottom. Okay, cool. I lift that up. Oh. Okay. These out. Oh, I can feel it. I can feel it in there for sure. Okay, well, good to know. The question now is how to get this sleeve out of here. I have no idea. All right, let's just try this before we get crazy with it. Oh, look at that. Sometimes you have to try things, even if they seem hopeless. Just inching its way out. It may just pay off. Well, I was able to accomplish the mission that I set out for, and that was to get everything having to do with the bearing out. And I was able to learn a couple things. One, what I thought was just like a sleeve that goes inside of this steering stem is actually called a race. And this is the steering stem bearing race. And it's essentially what the bearing sits inside of. And it was nearly impossible to get out. It is a compression fitting in here, so it is meant to be as snug as possible. What I ended up having to do is shaving down one side so thin that it was shave down one side of it so thin with the Dremel tool, I was able to break the metal of this race and then slip it out because there was no longer compression holding it in. Now, the top part of this I've made a good bit tougher for me to do that. One, because I kept all of the handlebar and everything that I installed intact, and so it's all in this one massive group. And that's essentially the biggest part of it, really. That's the biggest issue. So it looks like I get a little bit more use out of this guillotine looking thing. It is gonna be what I'll use to hold up the handlebar situation here, and it'll really just be a place to hang stuff right now. The bike still doesn't need it, which is really good, but I'm glad I didn't throw it away or truly disassemble it. It's still together, kind of. We'll use it for now, see how it goes. So now what I'm gonna attempt to do is to use the Dremel tool to cut the race that's inside of this out very carefully and without burning or cutting anything else around it. That's the plan.
Here I am, yet again, hoping against all hope. And yet...
Ooh, I was able to get it out without having to cut it. That is some of the most awesome news of today, because this race came out with just a little bit of prying, which is much different than the bottom. The bottom was sparks and Dremel tools and trying to get that thing out. But this actually feels and looks like it's in really good condition, which makes a little bit of sense. The impact was from the bottom of the bike, so it shoved everything up. And so with the old one, I'll show you it here. You can actually see next to where I dremeled out, you can actually see if I can catch the sunlight just right. So right there and there next to it, that specifically, you can feel it with your finger where there's dimples in the metal of this race. But unlike this one, where there are actual dimples in the metal where you can feel it clink clink across the surface of this race is almost absolutely perfect. Now, I still want to replace this because I have a whole new set, and just in case, I might as well put a brand new one in because this came out so easily. So that is what's next. I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful that the new one for the top goes in very easy. I would assume it would. And that the bottom one will go in easy. For the bottom, I think I may try to heat up the bottom and then be able to get it in. That's probably gonna be the best bet. We'll see how it goes next. So this bearing, I actually put in the freezer overnight. So I'm really hopeful it'll just slip right in. We'll see. And it doesn't. All right, so we've gotten it at least in. I just need to find a way to move this out of my way so I can hammer this in gently but evenly.
Please do not come after me for tapping this in with the butt end of my mallet.
There we go. Oh, yes. Okay, this thing needs to squeeze a little bit. Get in. There we go.
I was at least smart enough not to use a metal hammer, but I am a man with minimal tools, so I do what I can.
Ooh-wee. That looks good. So there we go. Nice and seated in there, a brand new race. That is really, really nice. Now we move on to the lower one. This one gave me a lot of trouble coming out. So I would expect, get out of here. So I would expect it to give me a lot of trouble going in. Let's see. Safety goggles. Awesome. Awesome. So that's really handy. That's really cool. If you're ever putting these in, use the old one, cut a little notch out of it so it slips in just into there, and use that to hammer it home. It is perfection. Take a look at it. We got it in. That is a huge sigh of relief. Now we can go ahead and put the rest of the bike back together. It shouldn't have any issues steering. It should feel really smooth. It's gonna be great. Now that we've removed the race from both the top and the bottom of the steering column within the frame of the bike, we can go ahead and move on to the lower triple clamp here. The only thing I want to check with this triple clamp is this metal piece right in here, and I hope that zooms in. There you go. And that piece there, I don't know what to call it except put it in the terms of what we just removed, the race, and it is essentially an inner race. And so this inner race will go inside here. On top of the bike, the bearing sits inside of the steering column, and the inner race, which is what we're going to call it, goes inside that bearing sleeve here, and then you sandwich the top handlebar down on top of that. But this inner race actually sits compressed onto the stem of this triple clamp. And I don't know how I would remove it if I was to have to remove it, but I don't believe I have to. The race that we took out of the top and bottom of the steering column had noticeable dimples, noticeable wear from the accident. Looking at this here, I don't see any. And then comparing it with a brand new one, which came with the bearing kit that I ordered, it is almost exactly the same visually. And if I take this brand new bearing and place it onto the race here, it is perfectly smooth as well. So with that being said, I believe I can take this here and keep it stock from what it came with the bike, and I can be comfortable with that after double and triple checking that. Now, with that being said, I believe we can move forward with installing everything back on the bike. All right, now this is going to be the most fiddly bit. After greasing up and dropping the top part back in, that should be seated in there nicely. And then we should have the same on the bottom. Now we get to put everything back together, which means this lower clamp gets to go up into the steering stem, but also this handlebar whole section gets to go back on top here, which putting these two things back together is going to be just a wee bit tricky.
These are the times when having a friend around would be really nice.
We have successfully connected the top to the bottom of this triple clamp. Now what we need to do, clean up all of the dash wiring. We need to get the front forks back into the clamps, torque this top down, torque the side bolt down, forks torque down, get the wheel back on, get this thing on the ground, get it running, get it riding, love it forever. All right, they're in, that's good. We're just gonna align them. If I'm blurry right now, that's all right. It's time for calipers to measure right there.
You've definitely seen this before, but if I'm being honest, I've come to love this part of the build.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Making sure everything is buttoned up, putting everything back in its place, and getting to hear those final torque clicks. Very satisfying.
Okay. With everything in its rightful place, we can go ahead and get the wheel back on the motorcycle and then hopefully drop this thing down for good. Until they need to replace that front wheel because it is old and needs to be replaced. But until then,
old tire goes on and down she comes. Man, she is good looking.
We have good news and some bad news. The good news is the front suspension is on the bike, everything is torqued down, and there's no jitter. It is so smooth. I'm honestly at a loss for words at how excited I am. And one of the things that was frustrating me a little bit before I had to take everything apart was these forks felt sticky. They would stick. It was like impossible to get them to give any bit. They are adjustable, and so I was able to tweak those a little bit and get them to soften up a good bit. So that's fantastic. There's no more jitter. Those bearings that we just put in are doing beautifully. And the only downside is there's more work to get done. So as you can see, this is not complete. We're missing a couple things here. There's some tidying up to do for wiring. There's headlight to put in. There is the front mud guard. And for that, we're actually gonna do some paint work. So there's more to get done, but I am so excited that this is finally in a place where I can be happy with how it feels and handles and moves, and we can get back to just cosmetics and on the road. Today we need to do a little bit of off-brand work on the motorcycle. And by that I mean some chain adjustment. This motorcycle came to me with this chain very loose. So what I would like to do today is get this chain nice and tight so that way when we do test drive this motorcycle, it doesn't go slapping around everywhere. Next, what we gotta do is we gotta come in and loosen this main bolt on the rear swing arm. And that's what's gonna loosen this hub from the swing arm itself and allow us to adjust this chain. Now that that bolt or the screw, whatever you wanna call it, is loose, we should be able to use this special tool, which is this, a spanner wrench, to reach in behind the sprockets here. It has the tooth that snags onto the hub itself, and we're able to tighten the chain that way. The instructions that I have, it says counterclockwise to tighten, clockwise to loosen. If I'm thinking about it, clockwise should tighten. We'll do it both ways and figure it out. So you can see behind the sprocket where the spanner tool will come in and it will grab onto the tooth of the sprocket here. I'm actually gonna reach a little bit further in. That should allow us to tighten it down. Let's try my way. Oh, that is definitely loosening it. All right, well, I guess the instructions are right. Flip it, and... oh yeah. All right, it's tight. It's probably too tight, but we can double check that. So, per the workshop manual, which I have at least part of it here, this says that I need to measure the distance between the center of the chain and the aluminum part of this swing arm. It needs to be between 32 to 34 millimeters from the center to aluminum. Right now it is super tight. I tightened it way too much. But what I need to do is to push down on the chain at the center point measurement and release it, measure the distance between A, the middle of the chain, and the aluminum part of the swing arm next to the heat guard, this. And then it needs to be 32 to 34 millimeters. So push it down, release it, and where it sits, that's where it needs to be 32 millimeters. 32 millimeters? Yeah, that seems about right. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and loosen this up a little bit again, because we tightened it way too much. Push down. Measure. So I think it needs to come up just a tiny bit. Let's try that. So it's eyeballing a little bit, but center, it's right about 33 millimeters, 32 to 34 millimeters. We're golden, baby. Now all we gotta do, tighten up that back bolt. It's just one for this model. I've even seen 2023 Diavel V4s with the 2 bolts in the back, but this 2024 model has but the 1. So all we gotta do now is tighten that one back bolt up to 40 Newton meters of torque, and we should be golden. All right. And with that, we should be able to ride it without it being clunky. It is the next day, and we are going to be moving on to do some more body work, and we are going to specifically work on the air intakes, or the air ducts, whatever you want to call them. They have no purpose to this motorcycle. They are purely aesthetic. But the Ducati branded carbon fiber pieces that I would really love for this are just about $800 to $900, and that's too rich for my blood. So, because of that, these are from China, and they're going to need a little bit of work. The matte finish on these isn't the greatest, and if I want them to match what is already carbon fiber on the bike, I'm going to have to do a little bit of work myself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand these down to about an 800 grit, and then I'm going to matte clear coat these to match the clear coat matteness of the carbon fiber on the bike currently. We're gonna try it out and see how it comes out. With that said, we are off to the races. Back in our favorite body shop area of our garage, we are going to attempt to do what China could not. There's nothing really imperfect about this carbon fiber right now. I'm just laying down a really thin scuff on this. That way the clear coat will lay really well. I think that's pretty good. Again, it's just a quick scuff down so I can get the actual clear coat on this, and we're ready to go.
Nothing fancy going on here. This does mean that I'll have to do a fair bit of finishing work, but I'm not too worried about getting my hands dirty.
So that worked out super well. I feel like the matte clear coat on these worked out really well. And so now what we need to do is we need to work on this part here, which there's nothing there right now. And on the stock parts, there's a mesh that goes there. They look like this. And then this mesh is gonna go on the inside of this here. So I've cut it out just right so that it slips right over where it's supposed to be inside, and then it's a really nice fit to the carbon piece itself. Now all I need to do is fix these in place. What I have for that is some panel bond. As another great YouTuber does, we'll use some Mansory glue and attach these to the carbon fiber. And then we can continue with putting these together and installing them on the motorcycle.
The OEM or the Ducati branded carbon fiber pieces are going to come with tabs that the mesh is going to slot into or is going to attach to. But for me, in this job, this is going to do just fine.
So that worked out really well. The epoxy in the back is holding up really nicely. The mesh is looking really good, I'd say. Now what we have to do is prep these in order to get the front fascias put onto the front. And those are the silver pieces that run around the edge here. And what I've gone ahead and done is pre-fitted to the other side to make sure I knew exactly what I was up against. And there's some work that needs to get done. Because these are molds of the originals from China, they're not perfect. And so the holes where the bolts come in were not exactly where they needed to be. And so it took a little bit of finagling. So a little bit of dremeling to get them in, but it works really well. I think it's looking really nice. These are all cosmetic pieces. There's nothing that is functional about them. So we need to prep the other side and get them all squared away so they can finally get on the motorcycle. Okay, yeah, that's looking really good. Very nice. Okay, it has been a couple days, but we are back on these air intakes, and we need to put a couple more pieces on them. We have this inner shroud, this inner plastic piece right here, and that will sit on the inside of this air duct, and that will slip in 1, 2, 3 of these grommets with 1, 2, 3 of these little spiky thingies. I don't know what they're called, but these go inside of these, and that's what holds this part of the air intake in place. You can also see here, possibly, you can also see there's a spot right here for a one singular screw, and that goes through this piece here. And this piece slides in to the back of the air intake like this, just like so, and will sit all together. So there's 3 pieces in total. You have the back spikes that go into the grommets. You have this back little piece here, which gets screwed into the motorcycle, and they all combine together to make your air duct, which sits on the side of the motorcycle. So we need to put all this together. That way we can get all of this back on the bike. All right, so looking at my paperwork, we have mapped out exactly what we need. We have our diagram here. We have the part number and how many we actually are going to be looking for, and the part itself ready for us to go. That way we can just start piecing things back together.
If you're a fan of building with Legos, these pieces are very much like that. They snap and slide right into place for a final, complete build. And when all is said and done, you get a really cool piece.
Now that we have our parts all put together, we can slap them on the motorcycle and hopefully get this thing looking good. I'm gonna do this side first, because on this side we have the whole ABS monitoring situation. There's a whole bunch of hoses coming out of it, and I have a feeling it's gonna be tricky to put it on. We may have to do some customization to it. So, this side first. So I make sure these are lined up here. Should be good to go. Oh, okay, I think that's in there. I just need to bolt it in. Right there. Now this side I'm not looking forward to because of this whole situation right here. The other side slipped in fairly easily, but there's just a whole lot going on right here. And I'm afraid that coming in, life's just gonna be difficult. We'll see. With that, this Ducati is back on the road, and I am very excited about how it's running, how it's riding, but there are a few little small things that we need to iron out before it is 100% reliable on the road. One of them being the front brakes. But beyond the front brakes and a couple of small things that we just need to iron out, a couple of small things here and there, we are in really, really good shape. And that's super exciting. I really want to take this into Ducati, have them look it over with a fine-tooth comb, make sure we're golden, and then take it on a very long road trip to really get to know it. But for now, we're gonna leave that for the next episode. Thank you so much for everybody who's watched so far. Thank you for following along, for subscribing if you have. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you can be notified on anything new coming up in the future. Again, for everything, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.